Now that we've shown you through all of the different processes in the previous videos, we're going to go through the process the whole way with my Trek. It's a Trek Madone full carbon fibre bike, so very light but also very delicate when you're doing the sort of stuff that we do. Now you'll have seen us media blasting stuff in the previous videos. I choose not to media blast this, although you can with nut shells, so walnut shells or cherry pip shells. I choose not to because you can spend an awful lot of time refilling where the filler is pulled out by the media. So what I'll do is I'll hand sand all of this, even the hard to reach places like up in here. That'll make everything super flat as well, so I'll leave some of the primer that's already in the bike. I'll leave that in the bike. There's no need to take it all the way to bare carbon. We're not just leaving it an exposed carbon frame. So all of this goes together. Very complicated, but the way that the Trek Madone is designed is it gives you a suspension on the seat post. So there's lots of interlocking parts. So we'll clean all of these, sand all of these, and then repaint them. But we'll have to assemble partially for when we're doing the artwork. So we've already done an art piece, which is a mock-up for what we're going to paint the Trek on. So that will set the tone for what we're doing, and also it gives us an idea of what base colours we need and what we need to paint first, so that we know where we're going on the track. So we'll probably do the teal green as the start and then work from there. But first job, get all this paint off, get it sanded down and get it nice and smooth and flat. Okay, right, so what we're going to do is we're going to take the layers of paint off stage by stage. So we've got different grit paper here, sandpaper you basically call it. It's not sandpaper, but that's what most people will understand it as. So we've got different grits, which are different types of aggression. So this is the most aggressive we use, which is 120. And what we'll do with that is we'll just take off the top surface layers until we get through to the primer. But we'll need to see how Trek have decided to paint this particular bike, because there'll be black primers, grey primers and white primers on different versions, and with different manufacturers they use different types. So what we'll do is we'll start sanding in the areas where there's no decal on this particular part. The sandpaper will go through a lot quicker. Where the decal is, it'll hit the decal before it'll hit the carbon underneath. We want to remove all of that. But what we'll do is we'll take the clear lacquer off first, and then remove the decal if it'll peel off. It does sometimes it doesn't. And then we'll basically work how it tells us we need to work. So it's all careful, slow process, but if you do it properly, you can remove all of the paint safely without damaging the carbon underneath. You don't want to go hammering away with a big sander or anything like that, where you can risk the Trek sanding down slower than the paint around it, and you end up damaging the carbon in these areas around the Trek logo itself. All the rest of the areas then of the bike is obviously you're going to finesse it in areas where it's difficult or tight curves and things like that. You're going to do it by hand with just a little bit of sandpaper on you or in your hand, and then in the big areas you can use the block sanders. We've got a block like this. You've got to be careful. You don't want to be hitting any of the swage lines dead hard or anything like that. You want to use it in a block area, in a bigger area where you can go at it, and it'll start sanding through. You can see that there's lighter areas where this sandpaper is actually hitting the logo before it's hitting the surrounding paint. Obviously all of this is done with a mask on. You don't want to be breathing this dust in. It's not healthy for you. For this example, I'm not creating a lot of dust, but when I get going on the bike, there will be quite a lot of dust all over me and all over the table. Hence why we've got the towel there to catch a lot of it. Yeah, and then we'll just take all of the paint off, and then we'll be ready for primer after that. But it will take probably a good few, well, I'm not going to state in hours because I don't know yet, but it'll be a lot of hours sanding before we get this ready for the primer part of the painting. That's it, I'll get going. start off with putting a mask on to make sure none of this dust goes up my nose or in my lungs. And then the part that we're sanding now is, you can see the logo. So that logo is normally water slide or a vinyl decal. And we obviously want to remove that as well as the paint. But you've got to be careful because the decal will be thicker than the paint that's underneath it. So you've got to carefully remove the decal without going straight through the paint and then into the carbon. So we're using quite a heavy grit sandpaper here. That'll be a 120 grit, which gets rid of the bulk of the lacquers and the decals quickly. But as we get through that then to the primers, which we'll see in a bit, obviously we want to slow down the speed of the cut and make it a finer and finer grit. Right, so moving on from the last one, you can see now there's a white layer, red layer visible, but actually on the actual bike you've got a lacquer layer which you're going through first, the decals as discussed, and then you've got, or you can have multiple layers. So on this bike it's only been painted once. Some manufacturers will end up painting a bike twice or even 3 times, depending on the imperfections that they want to get rid of. So you can see that I'm carefully taking away the lacquer layer, then the base colour layer, and then getting down to the primer and then the carbon. What you've got to be careful of is you don't want to sand the carbon, or you want to get as little sanding done on the carbon as possible, because you don't want to remove the thickness of it. So you go around, debulk it first with the 120, then takes the base and the primer off with something like a 400, and then as you get to the carbon and the black primer underneath, I would normally use a 600 or an 800. You can do this dry and you can do it wet. That's just a preference thing. I find it easier to do it dry. I can see what's going on, and I can be careful as I go through the layers. You will find that there's areas that are easier to spray and harder to spray, so you'll find the thickness of the paint can be quite thick on the down tube and on the seat stay and chain stay, whereas somewhere like around the top of the seat tube it'll be quite thin, so you'll go through it faster. So you've got to be aware of that, and just, I mean, obviously this is speeded up, but while you're working on it, it comes off very slowly, and you want it to come off where it needs to come off, and basically be careful. It takes an awful long time to do this, as you can tell. It's an awful lot of work. You don't have to strip all the paint off of a bike to do a good paint job, but to do a proper paint job that's you can guarantee, or you can be happy that the paint is going to stick, taking it all the way down to the carbon is the best way of doing that. It also does highlight any imperfections in the carbon, and also if there is any cracks that haven't been noticed before, this will highlight them, so that you can see if there's damage on a frame. Touch wood, I haven't had any issues with that as yet, but I am told that if there's a crack in the frame, you'll see it after doing this process. So again, it takes an awful long time, going very, very thoroughly all around it. You can feel like you're almost getting somewhere on one side, and then you flip it over and it looks like you haven't touched it, as you can see from the footage there. But obviously we just keep going. Several dozen hours later we'll get somewhere near getting it all off. On this frame, it's a used frame, so there was chips and scratches in there. Obviously by removing all of the paint, we're going to remove all the chips and scratches at the same time. There's also filler in there from when it was manufactured new, so you've got to be careful that you don't fully remove all of that filler, or if you do, you replace it once it's out. There are people, or I mean even myself have done in the past, media blasted these frames with a walnut or a cherry pip shell, which then removes the paint by media blasting, but it can be quite aggressive and it will remove everything. So you end up with, when you're painting the frame later, you can have issues with pinholes and imperfections that would have been in the mould but you wouldn't have seen after it was painted. So you want to avoid basically causing more work by doing it that way. So I find it's slightly slower to sand it off this way, but there's no reparation work afterwards to replace what you've removed with the media blasting. But that's down to preference. Again, people like to do this preparation side of things differently. I don't think there's a right way totally. It's just preferences basically. There are certainly wrong ways though. And obviously you got to be careful. It's carbon, it's delicate in this position. Right, so moving on, we're doing the smaller parts now, which actually can take quite a long time because they're more fiddly, and especially on something like the front forks, there's raised areas for the brakes and for the brake pipe that comes out of the inside. So you've got to be careful you don't start flattening that off. You want it to keep its shape and also its structure. So you just go around it carefully, making sure you get as much of the paint off as you can. There are areas that we'll obviously mask off prior to painting because we won't want paint in there. So before I start sanding, I will photograph most of the items to remind me of where needs masking and where needs paint, so that we can make sure that we're painting the proper areas and not causing issues later on when the bike is assembled. And then we've got the actual adjustable part of the seat tube here. With that, again, removing as much paint as you can without damaging the part. You can see there I'm using a flexible sanding pad. So it's a 3D printed pad, but it's got a little bit of flex in there so that we're not flatting off and squaring off any of the items, because they're all, on this bike in particular, everything's got a curve to it. And you can see that we're getting through it quite quickly. Again, exactly the same process as with the frame. So we start with 120, 400, 600 and then possibly 800 depending on what we're doing. We can see the results of that as we get the primer on later. And then the really fiddly small bits will come next. Again, you don't have to remove all of the paint from these items. It's more a case of debulking them, taking the main amount of paint off so that you can actually paint it and not end up with it losing all its definition. So that's the cowl for the where the seat post contraption, I can't remember, it's ISO 6 I believe, is shrouded by that, and then this is the actual head tube cover that's being done as well. Now these have got small tolerances, so you don't want a big build up of paint on these because they will cause interference when they're put together later. Yeah, so just sand. It can be a laborious job, boring as anything, and kills your shoulders.